Hey guys, welcome back to Total Tactics FPL. It's Fran here and I'm back with the Game Week 14 cheat sheet. There actually aren't many changes on the cheat sheet this week. I would just like to kind of suggest that ultimately you have a 3-game week curve now towards the World Cup. So think about the impact of your transfers. Potentially you'd like to do transfers for Game Week 16 if you really wanted to dead end there. But we are also approaching a phase where the actual impact of whatever transfers you make are much more minimal than in previous transfer cases, right? Because you only have the 3 weeks with a player. And I don't think substantially much has changed in the recent weeks when it comes to fixtures. That means we have to radically change our team. So do think about the quality of your hit if you are taking one this week, and specifically also what transfers you'd like to do heading towards Game Week 16 if you'd like to dead end a team. Because obviously what happens in Game Week 16 is it's effectively a free hit where you just have this one game week. Potentially you could look at players like Eze from Crystal Palace or even Zaha to bring him back into your team then, just because that one matchup is so important, whereas other teams such as a Fulham or a Newcastle that we have a lot invested into don't particularly have good games, such as United and Chelsea. So that's just a little bit of a preface here towards Game Week 14. As far as the actual movement in the midfield cheat sheet, we have Bailey rising. He still has terrible fixtures. I won't change that. I didn't change the FDR this week. I didn't really think there was much of a need to change. Yes, they absolutely blew apart Brentford, but we've seen collapses from Brentford before. We saw that last season in the first half versus Burnley. However, Aston Villa was very consistent there. They do have a new manager, though, and that does change things as well. Bailey's role will also probably change. I will say that Bailey actually kind of reminds me of someone similar to like Dan Juma, a very technical winger who, when Emery had previously utilized very well. Bailey's probably actually one we want to think about heading towards our World Cup wildcard. And of course, a lot of people are going to laugh because we took in Bailey at the start of the season and probably had the same things in mind. But we'll see. As far as the actual 5.0 to 5.9 players, I have a sort of rise here for Gray and Gordon. Gordon is a new asset as well, so do keep that in mind. I would also like to say that Iwobi has been fantastic this year. So when we look at someone like Granit Xhaka, who actually scored last week, who we've actually kept on the cheat sheet for a while now, a player like Iwobi has really emerged as an asset. Not necessarily just purely in FPL. I think clearly in real life he's played tremendously as a central midfielder, but he is starting to provide a lot of value, and you can see so much consistency with him in the games. His underlying stats have also increased year on year, so I do think it will be someone you might want to think about in the future. But we have such a small timescale here where Everton have a great run of fixtures. You really could go for a super differential pick and go Iwobi. Otherwise, I still think Gray and Gordon are still absolutely great options to target. Is it the time to go for Calvert-Lewin now in the forward positions? For me, that's not the case. So I would definitely target an Everton midfielder or an Everton defender or Pickford, obviously. As far as 6.0 to 6.9 players, I've got Trossard here as a rise. Trossard was someone who did fall last week, but ultimately, Trossard still has a 3-game week window. That's fantastic. Aston Villa at home, Wolves away are still great fixtures. We are seeing that Wolves are one of the worst teams so far. And Chelsea is going to be a huge game, right, where I would actually imagine, especially watching Trossard this season, I don't really think that he's really struggled even versus some of the best defenses. It's not even like I would argue that his ceiling is capped by any specific team. However, of course, we still have seen a lot of dismaying results from Trossard, and potentially if you are a manager who'd like to back some sort of consistency, I guess Martinelli still provides you the absolute most in this price bracket, even though he's been a little bit quiet as of late. Rashford, too, for me, has absolutely passed the eye test with flying colors recently as well, but he hasn't necessarily scored or hauled like he did earlier in the season. So I do think he's one to look at as well. His underlying numbers are still great. And as I said, I think Rashford is absolutely due a haul, specifically within these Aston Villa and Fulham games. And also just getting to play at Old Trafford at home is nice because we know this West Ham team are quite defensively formidable, but specifically so at home. Whereas United playing at home is going to be a huge little plus there. We did see Rodrigo score last week and Barnes as well. I'm not really going to touch these players because they do have 2 top fixtures out of 3. So are they really worth a transfer? Probably not. I would imagine you'd already have transferred these players out already. As far as Paqueta, he's also in that kind of tier where I think he will be an asset that potentially emerges over the course of the last season, or this season, sorry, similar to how Bowen really grew into that year when Benrahma was actually the one who started the season hot. Now, I'm not suggesting Bowen's going to be a worse asset than Paqueta, but I do think Paqueta is one to watch, but potentially, obviously, later in the season. As far as the 7.0 to 7.9 price bracket, we have someone here like a Zaha, Saka, Anthony. I don't think much has changed. Bernardo was someone who actually scored last week. Does Bernardo deserve a rise towards the top tier? I still don't think so. I still think Foden's peak and his ceiling is much higher than Bernardo. You're going to just simply get more games where Foden will get more hauls, and over the course course of the season, I do think it will bear out that Foden will be a better asset. Am I suggesting that Bernardo's a bad asset? Absolutely not. That's why he's a second-tier asset. As far as Antony and Saka and Zaha, I mean, Zaha and Saka, we don't really need to talk about them. These guys are penalty takers. They're fantastic on field. Antony obviously doesn't have the bonus of the penalty taking, but he has been an absolutely legitimate asset this year. We've seen him score in some of the toughest games. We've also seen him be more than the one-dimensional player that some people have suggested that he is. And I really think these fixtures are perfect if you would like to go in and kind of sidestep potentially one of the Arsenal assets, because they do have a Chelsea fixture in between, which I actually don't think is too tough. But if you'd like to sidestep that, you absolutely could invest into a United midfielder. And I do think Antony and Rashford are the absolute assets to get from this United team, unless you'd like to pick up someone like a Dalot or a Shaw as well. But because West Ham have been relatively good as of late, because Fulham have been quite a strong attacking team, not exactly sure if I'd really pick those two assets over one of the midfielders from Man United. As far as the second half of the midfielders, we really don't have too many changes here, which is consistent with the theme of the cheat sheet this week. Mount is someone who drops. I think when you compare to someone like Foden, Foden simply has pure fixtures. Bowen has 2 out of 3 great fixtures compared to Mount's 1 out of 3. And simply put, Mount has just reached an area where he has much worse fixtures now. And when you compare it to someone like Sterling, who actually still has much better underlying stats than Mount, Mount has completely overshot his expectations, whereas Sterling has completely blanked. What I would actually say is that Mount still looks actually very good towards the eye test, but now in this phase where you have Arsenal, Newcastle, just not really worth considering when Bowen has such great home fixtures. Now that we're also seeing that Crystal Palace is actually such a defensively frail side at times, and Leicester, even though Ward has been an absolute demon, I still imagine that West Ham can actually score in that game. And with the added bonus of Bowen being the penalty taker, I really think that he's just one asset to actually keep if you already own Bowen. I myself might even be looking to move towards Bowen in 15-16 if I can force some sort of transfer there. I don't think I can potentially. But he, for me, is not a drop this week. And I think Maddison is also similarly in a bad stage, such as Mount, because of the Man City and West Ham fixtures. And when we're talking about the top-priced assets, the absolute premiums, De Bruyne and Salah are the ones who absolutely have to stay at the top for me, specifically with the news that Haaland has suffered a knock. We don't have any updates as of now. The time of recording is actually before the Champions League game, so of course, hold on to that. But De Bruyne still is a top asset, and Salah, even though he's been blanking in odd weeks and hasn't really had some of the kind of momentous hauls that we've come to know and expect from him, and with the Liverpool team being so poor, I would say game on, game off, we now have a situation where Salah is still actually probably a top captain because Leeds are such a poor side. And also Southampton, I would say they've actually been defensively quite solid this year, but still probably potential for Salah to score. And I do expect also, similar to how the Arsenal and Tottenham games are usually quite high scoring, I do think the Liverpool-Tottenham games, especially when you're watching last season, were actually very good. Tottenham actually bested Liverpool, but there still were potential to score goals from both sides. And we've actually seen that Liverpool are actually able to step up to any team from an offensive point of view, but we've also seen just so much lacklusterness from their defense. I would say that Liverpool attack is still something I'm interested in owning and investing in. For Son and Fernandes specifically, still not that interesting because they're just better assets within their teams, not necessarily in the same positions for the case of Son. But of course, with Fernandes, you just have options like Rashford and Antony, for me, are much more interesting. And then with Son, you just really can't deny the consistency of Kane this year, specifically because he is all over those penalties and all over the set pieces. So that's kind of the added boost there, specifically because Son also, you could argue, is out of form. And that's just lay of the land right now with the midfield kind of being stagnant. If we move on over to the forwards now, the one change here within the kind of budget territory is to actually drop Solanke and Daka. The main reason for their drops is because of Daka, once again, as I mentioned a few weeks ago, having the potential to lose his position in the team towards someone like Vardy. And we've already seen a little bit of that with Scamacca as well, although I don't think he's necessarily worth a drop because I think he just has better fixtures. When it comes to Edouard, he actually has great fixtures and potentially really does deserve to be in that second tier price bracket. But because he also is prone to rotation, I don't love it. And I also think that Crystal Palace just simply haven't been that offensive a team. And you'll also see that the better players are actually within the midfield, within this Crystal Palace team, specifically Eze and Olise in the recent weeks, and also Zaha just being consistent. Although Zaha actually himself, I would say, has probably also undersold expectations for a lot of owners recently, myself included. Welbeck is someone who just really can't finish. I probably should actually put him in an avoid, specifically so people don't pick him up, but he still has great fixtures, right? 15-16 is the fixtures that you'd like to own your Brighton assets, and I'd probably keep them for if you didn't already move them out. So I can understand why people, for example, have Brighton defenders for 15 and 16 and have kept them in their bench for this time being. As far as Solanke, he is someone who drops. We don't really know the state of the injury at the time of this recording, but he has looked fantastic in games. And I think the Leeds and Everton games are definitely fixtures that you'd like to keep him for. So because he's so cheap in FPL, he probably might be one that you'd like to keep. If you do have the ability to upgrade from Solanke to Mitrovic, then I would absolutely consider moving into Solanke at that point in time. However, for the time being, I would probably just keep Solanke in your team. Hope that he's actually ready to return 15-16. Otherwise, I would actually completely squeeze that budget and move it into the midfield. See if you can get an upgrade there or a defensive upgrade for 15-16 specifically, and just target teams that have a good 2-game week window potentially. Because we all knew that the Solanke game wasn't going to be great for him since it's Tottenham. With the 7.0 to 7.9 price bracket, I have included Ings as a player. We don't really know what Emery's going to do, but we have seen him actually use, I would say, more, let's say, static strikers in the past. And I would compare Ings to someone like Gerard Moreno, really. So I think he could play a role in this team, but we really don't know exactly what role that will be. The fixtures, of course, are incredibly tough. I wouldn't say Watkins is an asset to own at all. Just want to really monitor ourselves so that when we head towards the World Cup wildcard, just want to think about whether we'd like to bring either Watkins or Ings into our team potentially. As far as the actual top-end players, Aubameyang does receive a drop. I just think he's a simple avoid. Tough fixtures, potential for rotation, much more upside coming from players like Jesus, Firmino, and Darwin. These are the types of assets that I would like to own. Kane, of course, has been an absolute paragon of consistency. And I actually think that moving back into Kane isn't a crazy idea. I know it sounds ridiculous, but Liverpool, of course, is going to be a tough fixture. But we've also seen, as I said, first of all, the mirror matchup where a lot of people are owning the premiums in both teams, right? You have players who own Salah who might actually potentially want to go back to Kane this week if they can. And then you also have the situation of what people will like to do with their funds, because moving into Kane will probably allow you for another upgrade into someone like Solanke if, let's say, he's injured long term. So it could be something that is worth thinking about. But of course, remember, the cost of the hit is going to be quite high at times, and you have only these 2 to 3 game weeks left. So one to think about there for the forwards. Moving on to the defenders, we really have, once again, just more drops this week. There aren't many rises because we were already looking at the 4-game week window last week. So when it comes to good fixtures and good players, I really think we've anticipated all the assets. We included Zoom in the cheat sheet. We included Ben White in the cheat sheet. These were assets who did well. When it comes to other defenders in the more expensive prices, still not really seeing any kind of flair that we can invest into. You could maybe look for Perisic as a 1-game week player, maybe later down the line, but I've actually dropped him preemptively this week because of the rotation that Perisic is now subject to. As far as Doherty as well, he's someone who actually I've removed out of the cheat sheet because I really don't think he's worth a transfer for now. If you own Doherty, of course, feel free to continue owning him. Same with Romero, but I just think you're getting more consistency from Dyer, but just to let you guys know so you stay informed. 4.1 to 4.9 players, I've only dropped James Justin. Leicester, sorry, actually have much worse fixtures now. Man City and West Ham, just simply fixtures I can't see them keep a clean sheet in. Everton are also finding some good form. Everton at home is also a significantly better team than they are away from home. So that's going to be a huge little upgrade there where I really can see that Ward could lose all 3 of his clean sheets, although Ward has been himself quite fantastic as of late if you are a Ward owner. As far as Brentford, they also seem to fall. They have great fixtures independently, but I think from a defensive point of view, there might not be so much value there because we are seeing a lot of frailty in this defense. They also have a City fixture there. So when you compare to, let's say, a West Ham or an Everton, there's really no reason to even own these players because other teams actually have as good or better fixtures and are actually exhibiting much better defensive stats. West Ham and Everton are both teams that I would say maybe are overperforming just a touch, but we have seen a lot of historical consistency from a team like West Ham, so that makes sense, right, to kind of back the West Ham defense. And then simply with Everton, I would say you could argue that Pickford just simply has been showing such great form as a goalkeeper that it probably makes sense that he is overperforming expectations, right? When you look at, let's say, historically great goalkeeping seasons like De Gea many years past. 5.0, 5.4, no changes there, and 5.5 plus, we've dropped Alexander-Arnold, we've dropped Van Dijk and Robertson, but I actually have also included Robertson into this range. The reason why Trent gets a drop is that I do think he's now prone to rotation. I also think that Milner, surprisingly, has been putting in good performances, specifically that City game. Not exactly sure what the situation is with Trent. Potentially needs to be managed, potentially needs to ease in as well. So there might be scope for him to be rotated. We have Van Dijk and Robertson. Robertson fresh off of a rotation where Tsimikas played. You could also argue that Tsimikas has been playing well, so maybe Robertson isn't going to be nailed for the next 3 games. But I do think that this is a good kind of avenue to maybe own Robertson and get a little bit of differential gains if you'd like. I probably feel it's a little bit safer to go with Van Dijk, even though he completely scuffed a chance to score in the previous week. I don't know if anyone was watching one of the set piece chances that Liverpool had, but Van Dijk completely lost out on a chance to actually score a goal and actually tried to look for a back post assist. But anyways, that ridiculousness aside, Perisic and Chilwell also fall. This is simply because I think Chilwell is too expensive to own as a rotatable asset, and Perisic also falls in a similar category, although he has one less poor fixture, and that's kind of the lay of the land with the defenders. Finishing off the cheat sheet, we do have the goalkeepers. The one rise here is towards Pickford and De Gea. I just think they have 3 great fixtures, 3 opportunities to get clean sheets, get potential crazy save points. Yes, Fulham's a tough fixture for both of these players. They are playing Fulham away. I do think these are avenues where probably Mitrovic will actually find his way to score, get a penalty, etc., etc. But still, great opportunities to get clean sheets. And if you're just looking for a 3-game week window to get a keeper, I think White and Pickford, De Gea are your picks. Everyone else really around the cheat sheet and in those kind of areas actually still have 1 or 2 bad fixtures. So really not ones to consider if you're looking for a very short window for now. Pope, Ramsdale, Salah, same sort of situation there, where they all have the Chelsea game. Salah arguably has worse games as well. Wolves have also been absolutely shambolic. We saw Leicester, of course, have a crazy performance, a performance where they actually amassed less XG than Wolves and still actually scored 4 goals within 5 shots. So that's the kind of level that I think Wolves are really struggling to kind of meet the demands of the Premier League specifically. And look, ultimately, I think this is the situation here where Wolves are one of the worst teams in the league, especially in form, and they're still in search of a permanent manager, so definitely one to avoid. Ederson and Alisson, top assets for now. I think Alisson was someone I actually rose in the previous week, so for me, I still think he has that tough Tottenham game, but we can still see some great shutouts here from both keepers. They probably still remain at the top, and it's just really just a reminder that, let's say if we wanted to head towards the World Cup and you know, we're struggling for Liverpool options, potentially Alisson is actually one that we can think about as a Liverpool option to get into our teams after the World Cup, because they still have a good run of fixtures then, and maybe there's a chance that this Liverpool defense can actually be consistent for more than 1 week, but we'll see, and we'll wait for that. But Alisson himself has been actually performing fantastically as a player. Penalty saves, great shot stopping, assists, even potentially also another goal this season. We'll see. But yeah, that's kind of the situation with the cheat sheet this week. Not many changes. I do think that we will have avenues for Game Week 15/16 where we can go for more ambitious players. But the trajectory here is that a lot of teams actually have reasonably good fixtures, and that's what the good planning has brought to us, right? The chance to actually pick players that will perform consistently and have a good window in this 3-game week place now that we've actually gone through Game Week 13 to actually get consistent hauls. So thank you guys so much for watching. I'll see you guys soon, and take care.